All right, are we ready?
I think so. You're live on Facebook.
Live on Facebook. Okay. So first of all, I want to start off by saying thank you to everybody for tuning in, taking a few minutes out of your evening to come to think about it. You know, the show that I said that hopefully makes everybody think about things that are pertinent to their communities, their cities, and their states. And I also want to thank Dewan Wash for coming out of retirement. I mean, not retirement, sabbatical. That's a better word, right? Coming out of sabbatical to spend a little time with us as well. Dewan, you know, in Wichita, we absolutely love you and we've been missing you. So again, I just thank you for just sharing a little bit of your time with us. And Kevin, as always, thank you. And we're going to have, you know, your insight as well. So I just want to thank both of you guys for just coming on today. And I think it's for a really good topic, a really good purpose, because as you both know, everybody knows, this is 2020. We got some things at stake going on this year. We got some important elections coming up. And so, you know, I keep reading headlines and I read posts and I see things where people are wondering, is it even worth my time to vote? Is it worth it to go to the polls? And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the 2020 elections. And so, Dewan, Before we get started, I just want you to just tell everybody what's been going on a little bit and how you doing.
Well, I'm doing actually really well. I just needed to take some time to take a step back, to focus on me. I think a lot of the times when you're involved in community organizing work, um, you can sometimes lose yourself because so busy worrying about everybody else and everything that's happening around you, that you don't often give yourself enough time, to
Absolutely.
focus on you. And so that's pretty much what I've been doing, is just taking the time that I need to just deal with generational trauma, childhood trauma, just different things that I've experienced in the past and as of late. And so, that's pretty much what my focus has been, is just continuing to grow, continuing to learn, and continuing to be renewed.
Awesome. And that's important what you just said. Doing community work, you take a lot on your shoulders. You take a lot home with you every single day. And then sometimes you see other people that don't care as much as you care. And again, you're carrying so much weight. And so we do have to remember to take a little time out, what they say, to smell the roses, as they say, and just take care of self. So
Right.
again, thank you for just breaking your sabbatical for a little bit and coming on with us.
I appreciate
Kevin,
it.
anything you want to talk about first, or you want to just wait to the end?
First I just want to say, Dwan, it's good to see you back out here. You are like my prodigal nephew in the movement, man. And I'm just glad to see you back out here getting the work done. I've been following the posts that you put up on Facebook as of late. You've been doing some really great work, man. So it's good
Thank
to
you.
have this conversation with
I appreciate it. Thank
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Dewan, I'm just going to reminisce one time, then we can get started. I remember I met you at a Sedgwick County meeting, and you were there. It was about the time when the commissioners they sent letters to the state or federal level, and they wanted to stop the WIC program for people that really needed that. And then I remember they tried to throw a little dig at you, and you just like brushed it off and just kept on going and stayed on point. And I'm like, that young man right there, he's going places. And I just remember my first experience with you. And ever since then, we've been so cool. And again, I just thank you for the work that you have been doing. And I know so much more is to come. So
thank you.
let's hit
Thank you.
this. 2020 elections. Dewan, what is going on out there? What is
Uh,
at stake?
I mean, what is not going on out here with these 2020 elections? What I see is a lot of the same type of things that's been happening during the 2016 elections. When I was at Sunflower, I actually said that Trump was going to win. Like, and Danilo, who was the executive director at the time, was like, "No way." I mean, there were 16 people that were running on the Republican side, but I'm like, man, you got to see like where we are in this country in terms of being divided. You got to look and pay attention to. I mean, Obama couldn't do nothing. He couldn't sneeze. If he sneezed, it was a problem for somebody. They
Right,
like, look at this brother sneeze. What's
right.
wrong with him today?
Hmm.
They went off on him about the brown suit. And every other president before him wore a brown suit.
Right,
So
right.
I mean, they hyper focus on every little syllable and thing that Obama said and did. And so you had two waves of populism. Now, coming from Kansas, Kansas is a populist state. So
Okay.
if you take a look back at some of the different writings and different things like that, that a lot of the farmers and stuff were writing at around the time that Kansas was becoming the state, Kansas is a populist state. And so when you had Bernie Sanders, you had so many people that were energized and engaged with what Bernie was saying. But on the other hand, you also had Trump, who was saying very similar things,
Hmm.
but just in a much darker shade, because,
Hmm.
populism is on a spectrum. And
Okay.
so the thing is that what's happening now is the exact same thing that's happening then. You have Trump saying one thing that's speaking to his base, and you have Bernie saying one thing that's speaking to his base. Hillary didn't lose. Obviously she lost because of the the Electoral College, but there were a lot of people who would have voted for Bernie, or who, and because Hillary was the nominee, they turned around and they voted for Trump. And so, because of how he speaks to them, you have people that are all throughout the Midwest, in Rust Belt states. All these folks have been left out. We're dealing with a gig economy now where people are having to drive, Lyft, and Uber, which is really meant to supplement income as their full-time job, because they cannot get work that pays them enough to live, a living wage.
Right.
And so with all of this stuff going on, you have a group of people that both Trump and Bernie are listening to, and so that is what I see happening today in the 2020 election.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So we got the, I call them the Bernie people. We got the Bernie people, right? And you said we got the Trump followers, right?
Right.
So what's the Bernie message?
Well, as I said, Bernie is more of like, people like to use the term socialist, but not quite really understanding what it is. Bernie, even though he identifies as a socialist, his policies are more so democratic socialism, whereas people have more say and ownership in the production. So if I'm going to work, I should feel like I should be able to get health care. I should be able to live and pay rent. I should be able to get to work. I should have public transit. I should have, some say and ownership in everything that's around me. It's not to say that the government is the one that needs to own all of this stuff. What Bernie is advocating for is a mix of capitalism and socialism, which already exists to begin with. But that's essentially what Bernie is trying to advocate for. Medicaid for all, Medicaid for all. I was having a conversation with a gentleman last night who was talking about Blagojevich, who just was on Anderson Cooper and got just ripped a new butthole on Anderson Cooper, if anybody hasn't seen that interview. But one of the things that Anderson pointed out was that Blagojevich is all talking about criminal justice reform now, and he said, well, I didn't really have an understanding of it till I went to prison. And it's like, well, congratulations, it
Right.
took you, excuse me, I can't say but I'll just say but. So
Okay.
It took going to prison, to understand that you have to advocate for criminal justice reform now that the president has pardoned you. I don't need to get cancer to know that I should have access to affordable health care. That type of thinking is absolutely ridiculous. So these are the sorts of things that Bernie is advocating for, so that people can have a living wage, and what it means by a living wage. If you look at what the minimum wage was in the 70s, people could go to work, they could have one job, they could be able to take care of a family of four, they could have a car, kids could go to school, they could do all of these things on just the man's income, on just the head of household's income.
Right. Right.
When you have Reaganomics that come into play, when you have the rise of what Reagan and Nixon considered to be the welfare queen, they break down the black family, remove the man from the home, because that's the only way you can qualify to get welfare at that time, and then begin to depress wages, while at the same time the student loan program where the federal government is giving loans is rising. So all of this stuff is essentially meant to keep the poor down, and to keep the middle class down. And so those are some of the policies that Bernie wants to.
Okay. So since you have kind of outlined what Bernie is talking about, so Kevin, I'm gonna put you on the other side, and you tell us what is it that our current president, what is his base? What's their appeal? How is he reaching his base?
And I think it's possible for one thing to exist in multiple contexts. So I think that, Dwan did an awesome job breaking down the political context in which we find ourselves, but there's an additional context as well.
Okay.
And that context goes to the fact that, our history has always been like a pendulum. We make progress, then there's a backlash. You know, more progress, then another backlash. We escaped from slavery, then we had Reconstruction, then we had Jim Crow, then we had the Civil Rights Movement, then we had, you know, one by one, we just keep going back and forth. And I think that over the last couple decades, once we elected Barack Obama, and it seemed as though politically, you know, there were demographic changes taking place in the South. The African American coalition actually was able to mix with progressive-minded whites and elect a candidate that the other side clearly did not want. You know, it represented progress. And that's aside from people getting into the political specifics over whether or not you approved of everything that President Obama did. His election was in and of itself a progressive victory. After that progressive victory, now we find the backlash, which is a historical precedent. And that backlash is Donald Trump, and it needs to be said and stated again and again. Donald Trump did not win simply by appealing to economic populism. It was more than people just were fed up about their jobs, because Donald Trump came in with a team filled with, you know, Stephen Miller, who is a white supremacist, Steve Bannon, who is a white nationalist, Sebastian Gorka, who was a Nazi. His very first speech when he announced his candidacy was coming down the escalator, and he described Mexicans as rapists. You know, putting babies in cages, there's no words for that. You know, after Charlottesville, when a woman was killed for protesting for justice, was killed in broad daylight by a Nazi, he goes to a microphone and says, well, some of the Nazis are really good people. You know, so I think that we make a mistake if we underestimate the fact that, you know, there's a reason why Donald Trump can lie and it doesn't cost him anything. There's a reason why Donald Trump can be impeached and it doesn't cost him anything. Because on the other side of this, his durable support, that 35% of his ride or dies, they're going to be with him regardless, because he gives them something. He gives them, when he talks about, we're going to make America great again, he's actually talking about restoring a social order to America that is appealing for a lot of folks. There were a lot of our progressive friends in other communities who we thought were going to be with us on election day until they got in the anonymity of the ballot box and pulled that lever. And then afterwards, we looked up and said, oh, wait a minute. Some of y'all didn't ride with us. Some of you guys went for Trump. Right. But there's a reason for that support. And I think it's also important that we maintain that vigilance, even as we go into 2020, because the longer we go without calling it what it is, without calling it by its real name, the more likely the possibility that they're going to be able to run the same playbook all over again.
Okay, so what is the name? What are we going to call it?
Racism.
Yeah, we are dealing with the same old struggle. You know, I once heard Julian Bond, when I was a young activist, saying that, you know, there is no new struggle. It's the same old struggle. And at the time, you know, every young generation thinks that everything is new and you're experiencing it for the first time. But I didn't get it. But this is the same old struggle. The battle over white supremacy and, you know, and all of its tenets has never been won. I mean, we're still locked in that battle. And politics is really, when you break it down, politics is the name that we give to the fight over power and money. That's all it is. Politics is about power and money. And those who have it, those who have power, and those who have money, and those who have influence don't want to give it up. That's why we're right now locked in a battle between billionaires, not because their ideas are so great, but because they have enough money and influence to affect the game in a way that ordinary people do not. Because at the end of the day, that's what the battle is all about, power and money. Power and money.
Dewan, would you agree with that? Power and money.
I absolutely would agree with that. I mean, that is a very root of white supremacy also, is power and money. You know, I mean, when you have this discussion with folks, you know, because I've always been told by a lot of people, when you talk about race too much, you know, specifically by white folks, you know, who have no clue or understanding how race as a construct even came into existence. it was about power and money,
Amen.
you know.
Right,
So
right,
it's like Kevin is exactly right in saying that this is the same fight, and the civil rights movement was only started in the 1950s. So it ain't that far gone,
right.
so the expectation that we are going to win a battle that is over 400 years in the making, to me is unrealistic. However, because I always tell people, I'm not fighting to I'm fighting for my kids. I'm fighting for our future because I'm a realist at the end of the day. I recognize that we got here over a half of a millennium. So it's going to take some time. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I still have to sit around and do nothing, and that I can't make a change and do impactful work today.
And I think that's important right there. Some people think it's just hopeless. You know what? You got your rich Democrats, you got your rich Republicans. You know what? I'm just little bitty me. I don't even matter. So why should I care? Why should I fight? Why should I even bother to vote? And that's the sentiment. As we know, in the last election, the population, the people voted for someone else. But then the presidential candidate or the winner went to somebody else. And so sometimes I think the people, they get weary. And so what do we tell people? And I got a scripture that tells us that we don't get weary in doing well. But when we bring it to where we are right now, where people are, what would you say to those that say, it doesn't even matter, my vote does not count? I'm going to,
You
DeJuan,
know,
take it first. Oh, Kevin, go ahead.
okay, one of the mistakes that we make when we talk about history is we say that, people died for our right to vote. So all these people, they died for our right to vote. That's technically correct. However, it is inaccurate. It's inaccurate because they didn't just die. They didn't just lay their lives down.
Right.
They were murdered.
They were murdered.
These people were murdered to keep them from voting and to prevent them from registering other people to vote, as in the cases of Medgar Evers and others.
Right.
When you look at everything that has been done, for all those people who feel like, well, voting really doesn't matter, it's just one person, it doesn't matter if I go to the polls or not. Think about the billions of dollars that are spent every year, not just on influencing politics, but also in terms of voter suppression and making sure, the whole fight. And the reason why a lot of people rode with Donald Trump is because Donald Trump would give them control of the courts. What power do you have when you have control of the courts? You have power to change stuff like the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
And when Scalia made his infamous statement that he felt like the Voting Rights Act was a racial entitlement, and suddenly a bill that had been passed unanimously every time it came up for reauthorization was then modified to remove the formula which allowed it to actually be applied to places. So now all of a sudden, you have all of the states throughout the South, the old Confederate states, who are free to put in place numerous election changes with the intent of disenfranchising Black folks.
Right.
And why would anybody go through that much time and effort and energy and spend billions of dollars on a franchise that was meaningless? It absolutely does mean something, because the way that it's structured in this fight over power and money, the only variable that they can't control is the will of the people. And if all of us come out and say, we don't want X, Y, or Z anymore, we do have the ability to impact the system. So in order to protect their power, money, and influence, they spend any amount of money and make any number of changes, whether legal, illegal, moral, or immoral, to try to keep us from voting and to convince us that we're powerless, which we absolutely are not.
Exactly. I completely agree.
And DeJuan, one thing I want to ask you, okay, so when we talk about that it's hopeless and pointless, I can go to pull data, and the demographic that you're in are the ones that are the most skeptical about voting. Very large numbers. And if your demographic, top of the millennial scale, bottom of the millennial scale, if that population would vote like consistently, it could really change some things. So how do you talk to your age group, your demographics? Because like I say, they hold a lot of weight that they absolutely are not using.
Well, I think that the millennials, a lot of people are just disenfranchised, and a lot of people don't understand politics. You know, they don't understand civics. They don't understand the importance of voting. Like, you have a lot of people that will go out and vote in the general election, but won't vote in the midterm. A lot of people that won't vote in local elections, which actually impacts you even more so than a general or midterm. So it just goes to just a fundamental misunderstanding of how everything that they are having to deal with, and everything that with outrageous student loan debt. The fact that I come out of college at an entry level job, and I got a $700 a month student loan payment that
Right.
I can't afford. So I have to now choose between college and living in a box.
Right.
Right. And instead of going to vote, and so people are just disenfranchised because they're overwhelmed with their current circumstances. I had the unfortunate situation where I had to go to jail. And so, I'd always done some advocacy around incarceration, but I had never actually seen it from somebody being directly impacted by it. When I got into the jail, I saw that it was a lot of people that were either my age or younger, mostly Black. I'm like, damn, do white people just not commit crime in Chicago?
Right.
Where are the white people at?
Right. Right.
I see all Black CEOs, that have been there, and so I started to have one-on-ones with those people, and I understood and I saw firsthand that this was normal to them. This was a situation where people were normalized to being incarcerated.
Right.
I saw Black CEOs, and it was normal for them to be, managing Black inmates. And then I seen the white officers are the ones that are out on the street. So I'm like, this seems oddly familiar. It's just like slavery. It is slavery. So when you have all of those pressing issues weighing upon you, the last thing you're concerned about is when you're gonna go and cast a vote.
It comes to vote.
Because it's all these other barriers that have been put into place.
Right.
And just like what Kevin said, the additional barriers that you have to when you are someone that is formerly incarcerated, not knowing, for example, that in a lot of places when you are papers that you can vote. I want to say that there was. Well, I don't want to say that because I don't remember, and I don't want to give wrong information. But all of those different types of things, and those things are done intentionally because they do not want us to vote. They do not want us to reach up and take the power.
Right.
Because ain't nobody gonna give you nothing.
Right.
This is a situation where you can't ask somebody that's oppressing you to stop. They're not going to.
Right.
If they
Why would they?
They wouldn't do it in the first place.
Right.
So we have to take that power. But in order to do that, it's gonna take one-on-one conversations with people. It's gonna take them actually showing them, look, this is what we were able to do in this community that looks very similar to your community, and we were able to win. Because people want to see results. At the end of the day, talk is cheap. A lot of people been talking to us about what's going to happen and how this is going to stop and this, that, and the other, and it simply has not happened. And that goes with, regardless of what party you're voting for, talk is cheap. People don't want no more talk. Show me what you can do. Right.
And so on that note, we talk about power, we're talking about economics, and if we're saying that, like, Bloomberg got into this race at the almost the final hour because he has money, he has lots and lots of money. So that lets us know that there is a point to voting. And then the one, like you were saying, people are disenfranchised because we've got so many things going on in our lives. But like you said, if we can get the message out, if we can get people to vote on the local level and the state level, and also when I'm talking about state level, I was talking about the ones we send to Washington, the congressional level, but it's still in our own states. So in the state of Kansas, we can vote for who goes to Washington. And so we just focus on those things more so than who the president is. We actually can, like you say, start grabbing some of that power, start grabbing some of the things that they're trying to hold on to. And if we just start thinking on a smaller scale, let's just vote local. And local, when we vote local, we're actually voting for somebody to go to Washington as well. I think if we can just impress upon people that that's the real power right there, because the president, yeah, he can veto some things, he can do some stuff, but it's Congress that's the one that's actually allowing all these things to go on in Washington. You know, we talk about the children being taken from their parents. Congress had the power to do something about that. And so we can just start, like you say, talking to people and getting the message out and breaking it down. I believe, Kevin, one thing you had said about when we're talking about to people about going out to vote, we have to make it personal. We have to give them a reason as to why they want to go vote. And DeJuan, you're talking about the college tuition, the bill you have when you graduate. We got some people running for office that are addressing those needs. And so those are the things we should be talking to people about one-on-one to make them see why it's so important for them to vote. Because if it's not personal, like you say, you're not going to do it.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it. I mean, if it's not, if you can't show me how this is going to actually help me, I'm good, because I don't have enough time, space, and capacity to worry about it. You know, I have to be convinced that this is something that is actually going to make my life and my situation easier and better for myself and my family in order for me to have some buy-in with it. And just like what you said, storytelling, you know, it has to be personalized. You know, a lot of times, you know, people don't have an understanding of something until it hits home, you know, and you have to sometimes show them how this is hitting home. You know, if you're worried about why your light bill, it keeps going up and all of this stuff. Okay, well, we need to get you in touch with your you know, your local representative, you know, with your council person, and we need to get you in touch with your commissioner. We need to get you in touch with your state legislators. You know, so understanding who is in power, you know, like we don't just send people to these places and then that's, you know, oh, the work is all done, you know,
it's good.
You got the speaker, you know, oh, you're down at City Hall, you know, I'm good. No, the work continues. You know, I put you into office so because I want results, but that takes constant communication. That takes constant check-ins with them, you know, because at the end of the day, you know, if I'm getting a stack of papers, like one of the things that we would do is we would send a bunch of stuff up to Topeka, a bunch of letters and petitions and stuff. They don't read that stuff. They don't care about that. They throw that stuff in the garbage. What they care about is when you bring a busload of people like we would do and have Governor Brownback running up the back stairs to get into his office. Because then at that point, that's flexing some power. Because if you gonna spend enough time to drive 2.5 hours to get to Topeka, you guaranteed that person is likely registered to vote. That person is a registered voter. They gonna listen to them. You know, so those are the type of things that we have to help people understand and get more involved in politics.
And you know, and I just wanted to say real quickly, because I saw somebody posted a comment saying that, you know, they live in Kansas, they feel like it's a hick town, so they don't know if they need to vote because they don't believe that their vote counts. It is a mistake to focus all of our attention and energy just on the presidential race, because right there in Kansas, if you were to say, I don't think that, you know, my vote's going to count because, you know, I live in Kansas and therefore Donald Trump is popular here. Well, you've also got Chris Kobach running for the Senate. Same election, same ballot. You know, you've got several House races on the ballot. You've got state Senate races and state House races on the ballot. You've got municipal races on the ballot. So even if, let's say that, you know, you vote out of Kansas and Kansas swings a majority towards, you know, one of the candidates in the presidential election, that doesn't mean that you still can't impact all of the other races. And I also just want to say this, because sometimes people get into this idea that, well, if I can't have the perfect candidate, the candidate that truly represents me, then I don't feel good about voting. Therefore, I'm not going to. Sometimes we are blessed with a candidate who so well aligns with our personal politics that we can feel proud to go vote for them. There are other times when we have candidates and politicians who represent an existential threat to our interests, and we still need to go vote, even if we're just going to go vote against them. Because I can tell you, in this presidential election, I would vote for a vat of chicken grease if that vat of chicken grease was on the other side of the ballot from the guy who represents an existential threat to our community.
Right.
But I think that we should not let the enemy be the perfect of the good and get caught up in the idea that, hey, you know what, here's where my politics lie. And if someone is not right here, if they're only with me on 50% of the issues or 55% of the issues, I'm not going to support that person. That's ridiculous. Because if nothing else, when you know that the current occupant of the White House put 2-year-old babies in cages, he got to go. He got to go. I would vote for whoever pops up on the other side of that, because that represents an existential threat to everything that we stand for. And in addition to that, under no circumstances should we miss the opportunity to look at those down ballot races, to look at the judges who are on the ballot, to look at your state senate, your state house, to look at the U.S. Congress, to look at your municipal races. Absolutely, you have to go out there, because do you know most of your judge races, they end up running unopposed. If you go through the ballot and you look, you see a whole bunch of unopposed races. Well, that has a huge impact on our day-to-day lives. If we make those races competitive, we can really make some change that's long-lasting and sustainable.
Right.
I completely agree. I think it's very important that people get involved in local elections. One of the things that the ACLU and other groups are focusing on now also are prosecutors. People do not understand the great and tremendous unchecked power that district attorneys have, because it is completely unchecked, with prosecutorial discretion. I saw that yesterday, and people were up in arms in Chicago when a police officer was shot. And the person that shot them was let out on bond. Even Mayor Lightfoot, who's a Democrat, Chicago is a Democratic stronghold, was up in arms and made a post about how wrong it was for this person to be let out on bond. And now everybody's trying to blame Kim Foxx. It really had nothing to do with Kim Foxx. It's the judge that made the decision to let this person out on bond. But even with all of that said, the idea that a prosecutor can allow all of these sorts of things to happen, because the reality, even in that situation, is that person deserves to be out on bond. If that person has the bond, the idea of bond, is that you're going to show up at court. That everybody that has money, power, and influence, they get a bond. They are able to pay that bond, and they are able to go home. And in the same vein, police officers that shooting and killing Black people, they don't even go to jail. They don't. So it's automatic bond, for them. But God forbid this situation happens. So I say all that to say that with so much focus on the criminal justice system, district attorney races are another place and area that people need to have a lot of focus and interest in. And just like what Kevin just said, sometimes these people are running unopposed. District attorneys that get in office and stay in office permanently. And that's the reason why our communities exist in the situation that they're in terms of incarceration and criminal justice. It's because of the district attorneys that continue to lock us up, that don't allow us, and judges that are not being elected that allow us to be able to get out on bond or be able to afford a bond, they're over making bond unobtainable. The whole idea of bond is supposed to be something that you can obtain, and so that I can be able to get out and still function without losing my job, house, car, family while I'm out.
Right.
That comes, I'm innocent until proven guilty by jury and my peers.
Right.
So just to follow up with what Kevin was saying.
Right. And so, you know, criminal justice reform, we kind of segue into that, but it still gets back to elections, and it still gets back to voting, because like you say, we vote for the DAs, and we vote for that office. And when we don't go to the polls, we let somebody either stay in office that has a horrible track record, or we have the power, there we go again, that power to vote somebody else in that does have the best interest of the people. Nothing makes me more upset than when I go to a meeting here locally, and the DA says, if you don't like me, vote me out. And he says it all the time. His predecessor said it all the time. You don't like me? Vote me out. And then you see DAs stay in office for like 6 and 7 terms because they don't get voted out. And so that's another reason why we have to make sure we go to the polls, because when we talk about the incarceration of the Black man or the African American community, somebody on this level down here is sending us to jail. And you know where it starts? In that DA's office. Well, it starts with the arrest, because the police have the discrepancy of what to do when a call is made. So that's the first line, they have discrepancy. But the DA is the one that actually charges everybody that comes through the system. That office charges everybody. And so if we're seeing that African Americans are going to jail more so than everybody else, if we come down, 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 we got to start looking at our DAs and our prosecutor office and see who's in there. And again, we have the power to make some change, but we have to execute that power.
And you know what, LaWanda, if I could, I want to say something that I can get away with saying that maybe everybody else can't get away with saying, but it needs to be said.
Okay.
For those of you who are there in Kansas, or particularly there in Wichita, Kansas, you know, 9-year-old Royale Spencer was shot and killed playing with some friends in a house. Now there's even information where he may have been shot with the shotgun being placed in his mouth. And he was, but the shotgun, which they claimed it had been inside of a locked gun cabinet, but somehow the locked gun cabinet came open, and a room full of small children were allowed to play with a series of guns. There were BB guns and real guns, but they were in there playing with these guns unsupervised, that they magically took out of a locked cabinet because it probably wasn't locked. Royale came up shot, and the district attorney exercised his discretion to say that the parents should not be held responsible for being negligent at all. He basically blew it off as though, you know, this was just one of those crazy accidents that happened. Now, I don't know about you, but, you know, a 9-year-old getting shot with a shotgun in the face is not one of those accidents that simply happen. How in the hell did a room full of small children, 9 and 11, get into a gun locker that was filled with loaded weapons with no supervision, and no one is being held accountable? Right. And I say all that to say, if you think that's wrong, and I'm sure you do, but if you think that's wrong, you can't wish it to be better.
Right.
You can't march it to be better. Right. You've got to vote it to be better. Right. And that means you have to get registered, go to the polls, and elect a different district attorney who was flippant enough to blow it off, like LaWanda just said, and say, oh, well, you know, if you don't like it, just vote me out, knowing that enough of us will stay home that he has a good chance of staying in there. But we need to prove him wrong.
Exactly. You know, I think another important point to make in all of this is that you were speaking on it earlier, Kevin. You know, they have systemically removed us from the political process. You know, if they didn't care about us voting and being in office and representing our own communities, being our own police officers and all of these different things, you know, they would not have went to the extent that they have gone to ensure that we don't hold those positions of power and authority. You know, you take Williamson, North Carolina, for example. You know, they had, after the abolishment of slavery, there were actually more Black people in Congress and in positions of power and authority than at any other point in time in history. You know, so Black codes and Jim Crow and all that stuff came later because we did have the right to vote, and then it was taken away. Like a lot of people don't think that when they think that we had the Voting Rights Act and all that stuff, they just think, oh, we won the right to vote then. No, we could already vote. We was already in office. We was already in Congress. We was already running our own states and counties and cities. You know, Black Wall Street wasn't the only. Everybody talk about Greenwood and like Tulsa, Oklahoma was the only black city. No, that was one of thousands.
Right. Right.
Across the country. So we've already have done all of these things, and this is why all of these barriers are being put into place to prevent us from being able to do and build the economic sustainability that our communities used to exist in. See, we have to get away from thinking that, oh, woe is me, our communities, like we just come from nothing. No, we are a resilient, strong, and powerful people.
Yes.
When we were freed from slavery, when slavery was abolished, we went and established our own city.
Yes.
We went and established, our own communities, and the dollar stayed in our community. And they got upset about that. They got angry about that because at the end of the day, it took away their jobs. Because now, who am I policing now when the black people is policing themselves?
Right.
Who's out in these fields now? Like wait a minute. So it disrupted their economic sustainability. So it is up to them. They are going to pull out every tool and method that they can in an attempt to keep us in the exact same predicament that we exist in. And so we have to take that power back, and Kevin is exactly right in suggesting also that with the idea that a lot of these people know that that we're not going to come out and vote enough numbers to be able to remove them from office. I mean, where do you think all those people that had all those signs, back in the 60s and the 50s went? The people that those people are still alive. Where do you think that those people ain't dead yet? These people are still voting. Those people are the ones that are getting elected. Those people are our judges. They are our DAs. They are our police chiefs. They are the ones that are in positions of power. Do you think they're gonna call us niggers to our faces? No, they don't want to be on the news. Do you think they calling us niggers at home? You better damn well sure they are. They probably calling us niggers at City Hall when ain't nobody around to check them.
Right.
So in order for us to be able to create the situation and circumstances that we want, we have to take it. Nobody's gonna give it to us because those people have already filled those positions in order to prevent us from getting it.
Right. And Kevin, in Ferguson, after the marches, didn't a lot of people there run for office? Didn't they step up to the plate and try to make some effective changes in their community?
Yeah, and actually, you know what? Just a big shout out to a lot of the organizers who were there on the ground in Ferguson, because a lot of them made that transition into, and some of them who just came into Ferguson to protest, and then some of them like Starkley, who was there already on the ground in Ferguson, but making that transition to say, you know what, we actually want to be hands-on in changing the political system. I know that's not necessarily what people want to hear in the moment, right? When something happens and you want justice and you feel like that justice is being denied. But the way that you can ensure that in the future you can get justice is you need to get control of the justice system.
Right.
And the control of the justice system is a political system. Again, that's power and money. The only outside variable is the people and the people's ability to go in there and vote. So making that transition from anger to action to say, you know what, hey, these things are bothersome, these things are hurting our community, and we want to make them change. The way that you make them change is to follow the lead of some of those organizers on the ground from Ferguson and some of the organizers on the ground from Baltimore after Freddie Gray. And, and on all of these people who took into account all of these injustices. And when I talk about Baltimore, I would be remiss if I didn't shout out Marilyn Mosby, who is the DA up there, who actually went to task on prosecuting police officers who acted unjustly towards people in our community. But that's the power that we have if we come together and use our vote to gain control over the system. There in Wichita, Kansas, right where you sit, if you turn out all of the folks who are of voting age just in the Black community, you would have enough power to flip a state Senate or a state House seat. If you were to turn out all of our underrepresented communities throughout the state, you could certainly have a huge impact in the presidential election. Mm-hmm. You know, we have the numbers, we have the ability. What we lack is the organization, because the other side has been so invested in pumping messages to us about how it really doesn't matter. And, you know, the system is rigged. And even if you come out, nothing's going to change. They have a vested interest in making us believe that, because they like when the DA runs unopposed. It works to their interests when the judges on the ballot run unopposed, because that means that the agenda can go forward without being challenged. But what we have to do is to say, hey, you know what? If I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, not only am I going to vote, which is important, but not only am I going to vote, but you know what? Let me take a look at this ballot and see which positions nobody is running for, and see if one of these is a position that I could run for. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you know somebody who has some skills and some talent, and you can, you know, invest a little time in getting them ready so that they can run. Because what we need to fill those ballots and make sure nobody should be able to serve in an office if they are unopposed. I don't care who they are. Right. Everybody needs to be able to come before the community and argue why what they stand for is in the best interest of the community.
Right.
So we need to get candidates to fill those, and we need to turn out every single body we can to get to the polls and vote.
Right. And you know, when we go, and this year, when we go to the polls and we see what positions are running unopposed, I challenge everyone that's working with a youth group to start getting those youth ready to be on those ballots in the future. Like DeJuan, you were saying, we've done this before. We know there's forces against the people, but the people have the power. And so all we have to do is start getting the people ready for the next election. Every 2 years, every year, somebody's on the ballot for something. And so if we start getting people ready, like the DA running opposed, because I don't know if it's because people like what he's doing, or, I mean, there's plenty of attorneys out there. We just got to find people and get it in their heads that it's time for a change, and you can make that change. Or it's time to, again, start growing our own. I remember USD 259 had a program to grow your own teachers. It's time that we start growing our own politicians, and so that we can make those changes down the road. Again, we're talking about our youth, we're talking about our children, our grandchildren. We can get them ready to be the change that we keep talking about we need to see.
Exactly. Like Kevin was saying, you can't wish about it.
Right.
You know, because your faith without works is dead.
Right.
You know, there ain't nothing that you can do with just sitting around thinking about something that's gonna happen. You know, it won't. It takes action in order to be able to produce a result. You know, and so I just think that people can get involved, even on a small level, you know, with getting involved with party politics, you know, the precinct committee person. Right. You know, oftentimes, you know, those positions are run completely open and right. vacant, you know, right. But on the Republican side, they're completely fleshed out. You know, they have all the precinct committee seats open or filled, you know, like, but on our side, it's lacking. And so like the infrastructure definitely needs to be filled in order to be able to work more effectively. I mean, and that goes with any machine, you know, because all of these things are systems, you know, and a system is just like a car engine, you know, but you keep driving your car long enough without some oil, you know, something's gonna happen.
Something's gonna happen, right? Something's gonna happen.
The same thing is going to happen in this election. You know, if we don't get enough people involved in the systems in order to be able to change the system, you know, that's what we're gonna get the same result. You know, that's what it takes. You can't I tell people because part of the work that we do is try to dismantle the system, even though we're utilizing that terminology, we're not actually dismantling the system from the outside. We're trying to do it and reshape the system from the inside, because that's the only way that we can do it. I mean, unless we just gonna have a mutiny and anarchy, the only way for us to get what we need is by getting involved, is by getting elected, is by holding those people who are elected, even if they come from the block. Just because you came from the block don't mean I'm gonna call you and call you out on something that I don't agree with you on. When Brandon Johnson ran for the city council seat, I was very upfront with him because we're friends. When he let me know he was running, I was like, hey, people come up, are you running? Are you running? No, I'm not, because I already know him. So no, I'm not, because we realign. I'm gonna do everything I can to help. But hey, if you do something, I'm gonna have to come holler at you. Because at that point, it becomes impersonal. It's not personal. It's not an attack on you as an individual. It's a policy, that has an impact on me and on my community. So that's what happens too when you get people in positions of power and authority. Like, no, this ain't personal at all. But if you got a bad policy, is a bad policy.
A bad policy. Right. And so I'm glad you said that, Dewan, because we want, like you said, to grow our own, but our own have to understand that they're going to be held accountable as well. We're going to give you a pass, get your feet wet, learn the system from the inside, but then we have some expectations. But when we grow our own, they should know what the community needs, and it should be, fairly smooth sailing when we grow our own. And that's the thing. We have to just make sure that we are involved now, so we can impact now and we can impact the future. So I didn't want us to stay on for this long, but this conversation has been awesome. And I know we could go even longer, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And so, Kevin, I'm gonna let you go first. I want you to tell us what's at stake in 2020.
Everything. Everything is at stake in 2020. Betsy DeVos, when you think about the current administration, don't just think about the president, think about the entire cast of characters that he brought with him. Betsy DeVos, who oversees the education department, has undertaken a series of actions that literally threaten the sustainability of the public school system. She never taught in a public school system. She was never a teacher. She never had any of that background. All of her time and money and treasure and effort has been put into propping up the charter school system. So she's attacking student loans and whether or not student loans should be forgiven. She's making all types of challenges that need to be challenges to her own budget that need to be countered. He brought in Ben Carson to oversee HUD, Housing and Urban Development. Ben Carson turned in a budget which severely underfunded his own department, taking money away from CDBG funds, which are used, in communities all around the country for organizations who do work to benefit the community. It also affects their ability to fund public housing. When you look at all of these, the people who he's brought in terms of the judges and the judiciary, he's brought in judges who are not only totally unqualified, but judges who have written things in the past expressing hostility towards the Voting Rights Act. People who could literally, if given enough power and enough time, could literally take steps to try to not only continue to weaken it, but if he were able to get another Supreme Court justice to possibly do something that would to take it away. And when you look at some of the jurists who we have, like on the Supreme Court, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is a lion in terms of holding up a progressive vision and understanding of what the Constitution means in the context of serving all people. But Ruth Bader Ginsburg has had a number of health issues. She's an older jurist. If Donald Trump were able to be reelected and to come back and potentially get another Supreme Court judge, then that could give us a decisively Donald Trump style conservative. And when I say Donald Trump style conservative, I mean racial ideologue type conservative on the court. We could have that majority for a number of years. So everything is at stake. You know, our immigration. And when we think about immigration, everyone thinks about, you know, immigrants coming from Latin America. There's also immigrants that come from Haiti. There's also immigrants that come from Africa. And when he says things like, you know, African countries are shithole countries, how come we can't get more people from Denmark? You know, all of those things are on the ballot. So even if you don't feel like your candidate of choice is the one who becomes the nominee, and maybe you don't feel like, you know what, I'm super enthusiastic about going in and voting for this person, understand what the alternative is and make sure that above all, you go to the polls and you vote.
Okay. DeJuan, final word. What's at stake? What's at stake?
I mean, Kevin pretty much summed up everything. I mean, this is you know, a fight for our future, essentially, and not just for a future today, but a fight for our kids' future, a fight for their kids' future. You know, I think in this election and where we are today in America is critical. It is crucial that people actually get involved, get registered to vote, actually exercise that right to vote. If you are concerned about how much money you're making on your job and the fact that you have to work 2 and 3 jobs in order to be able to make ends meet, you know, you need to go and vote. You know, you need to understand that 67214 right there in Wichita, I haven't looked at the most recent numbers, but I don't even have to understand and know that the unemployment numbers that Donald Trump likes to trot out is a lie. You know, unemployment is high in communities of color, particularly because people are returning back from being incarcerated and can't get a job. You know, these types of situations will persist and continue and grow under the leadership of people like Donald Trump. You know, if you are worried about your child having access to affordable medicine and affordable health care, this is an election that you need to get involved in and that you need to have a clear understanding of, because 67214 has maintained the highest incidence of infant mortality in some of the highest cities numbers outside of the entire country. You know, is right there in Wichita. Right. If you are tired of billionaires, people who are so far removed from our community and so far removed from us, telling you what you need and telling you that they know what you need, you know, we don't have to go to New York and look to Michael Bloomberg for that. If you live in Kansas, you can go right down the street off 13th Street and you can go to Charles and David Koch's house. You know, they live right there in Wichita. Koch Industries, second largest privately owned company in America, you know, spends a massive amount of money to do things like, I don't know, abolish the minimum wage. Like, what? What is that? How does that make any sense? So you don't have to go outside of Kansas. And if you don't think that Kansas is important, if people think that Kansas is a flyover state, why were there 6 people that Donald Trump tried to get from Kansas to work in his administration? Our governor, our lieutenant governor, our secretary of state, you know, were just 3 of the other people that he tried to take from Kansas to work into his administration. District 4 Representative Mike Pompeo, CIA director, now current secretary of state. So to think and hold in your head that Kansas don't matter and that this election don't matter, the exact same thing is going to happen. Republicans utilize Kansas as a petri dish for what they're going to utilize, and they're going to use it, their little tentacles, to spread all of this stuff across the entire country. So the very livelihood of ourselves, our community, and our children is at stake, and that's why I think it's important for folks to get involved.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, DeJuan, for coming out of your sabbatical for us. Like I said, we missed you. I know great things are yet to come from you. And again, thank you for just joining us today. Kevin, as always, thank you. Your insight is awesome. You have such a good world view that you can bring, and you just make it just so understandable to the people. So again, I thank you as well. As we close out, I just want to remind everybody that one of the things that happened in the last election was these bots, these robots, these Russians sending subliminal messages, and they targeted the African American community. So I just want to remind everybody to be on the lookout for that. To when you see things that are telling you to not vote, just delete them. Dewan, you posted something on that, I believe yesterday. They deliberately targeted the African American community, and that lets you know again the power that we have as people. And so when you see those advertisements, those subliminal messages that tell you that your vote doesn't count, you better delete that immediately. Do not share. Do not share. Abort immediately. And as we close, I just want to tell everybody we want to see you at the polls. Again, thank you, community, for your time. We're going to keep on pushing forward. We're going to keep doing things to uplift our people, because that's what it's all about. I know we're busy chasing the bag, but what does the bag mean if the rest of the community is failing? So let's continue to work together. Dewan, I'm expecting great things from you. Kevin, I know you got some projects in the works. Community, we got this, and we will make a difference. Thank you for tuning in to Think About It, and hopefully we gave you something to actually think about. I know we did. And just keep staying tuned on Sunday, 6 p.m. We're going to keep doing this. We're going to make it bigger and better. But again, it takes all of us working together to do that. I've invited a Republican to come on, and I hope I can get a Democrat. We talk about the party differences and if it really does make a difference or not. And so hopefully the Republican had to get permission to come on. So hopefully he gets that permission. And we're going to talk party differences. But at the end of the day, it's all about power and economics. And if you want a piece of the pie, you got to get to the polls. So thank you, everybody. We're going to do this again soon. Bye, Dewan. Bye, Kevin. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.